Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan. You know the legends. You know the statues. But what if I told you that in 1980 there was a monster who was arguably better than all of them? Meet Michael Brooks. He wasn't just a star, he was the Beast. He was the captain of the U.S. Olympic team, chosen over Isaiah Thomas. He was the College Player of the Year, beating out Magic Johnson. He was supposed to be the face of the NBA for a generation. So why have you probably never heard his name? Because Michael Brooks didn't just lose a game, he was erased. First by a political conspiracy in the White House that stole his gold medal. Then by a cursed franchise that ground his bones to dust. And finally by a silent medical secret that no one saw coming. History has tried to scrub this man from the record, but today we are reopening the file. We are going to expose the bad luck, the cover-ups, and the tragedy of the greatest player you never got to see. Forget what you think you know about the 80s. The real story starts now. To understand Michael Brooks, you have to understand where he came from. You have to understand Philadelphia in the 1970s. This wasn't the city of brotherly love back then. It was a city of grit, grind, and survival. The basketball courts of Philly weren't just playgrounds, they were coliseums. If you were soft, the city chewed you up and spit you out before you could even lace up your sneakers. It was a factory that produced toughness, but even by Philly standards, Michael Brooks was something else entirely. He grew up in a time when you earned your reputation in blood and sweat on the asphalt. Attending West Catholic High School, Brooks didn't just play basketball, he terrorized the Catholic League. Imagine a teenager, still a kid really, but built like a fully grown man who had spent 10 years lifting steel beams. He stood 6'7", but he moved with the grace of a guard and hit with the force of a linebacker. Witnesses from that era tell stories that sound like folklore. They talk about a high school kid who could grab a rebound in traffic, surrounded by 3 defenders, and clear them out simply by flexing his elbows. He was a man amongst boys, literally. While other kids were worrying about prom dates and homework, Brooks was destroying the psychological will of his opponents. He wasn't just scoring points, he was sending a message. In the legendary Philadelphia Catholic League, which has churned out NBA talent for decades, Brooks wasn't just a star, he was a supernova. He broke records that people thought were unbreakable. He didn't just win games, he owned the paint. Every time he stepped on the court, there was a buzz in the air, a sense of danger. People packed into humid, tiny high school gyms just to see the monster of West Catholic. They knew they were watching something that defied the laws of physics. But little did they know, this dominance was just the warm-up act for a collegiate career that would leave the entire nation stunned. When it came time for college, Brooks didn't run off to the big basketball factories like UCLA or North Carolina. He stayed home. He chose LaSalle University, right there in Philly, and this is where the legend went from local folklore to national headlines. If high school was about brute force, college was where Michael Brooks became a virtuoso. Let's talk numbers for a second, because the numbers are frankly obscene. Over 4 years at LaSalle, Brooks scored 2,628 points. Read that again. 2,628 points. He grabbed 1,372 rebounds. He wasn't just a part of the team, he was the team. The offense started and ended with number 32. He was a one-man wrecking crew that opponents couldn't solve. They tried double-teaming him. They tried triple-teaming him. It didn't matter. Brooks had a mid-range jumper that was automatic, and if you crowded him, he'd blow right past you and tear the rim down. But here is the fact that has been conveniently swept under the rug by the NBA hype machine over the last 40 years. In 1980, the year of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, the year that supposedly saved basketball, do you know who the best player in the country was? It wasn't Magic. It wasn't Bird. It was Michael Brooks. That's right. In 1980, Michael Brooks was named the NABC Player of the Year. He swept the major awards. He was looked at as the most complete, most NBA-ready player in the entire NCAA. Think about the gravity of that. We worship the rivalry of Bird and Magic today. But in the summer of 1980, the smart money was on Brooks being the one to dominate the next decade. He was the crown jewel, the absolute peak of the mountain. He was standing on top of the world. He had the awards, he had the stats, and he had the reputation. He was unstoppable. But just as he reached the summit, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. The year 1980 was supposed to be his coronation. Instead, it became the year of the great betrayal. Politics and international tensions were about to collide with his destiny, and the fallout would be the first crack in the armor of a giant. Imagine for a moment that you have spent your entire life training for one specific moment. You have sacrificed your childhood, your social life, and your body, all for one singular goal. For Michael Brooks, that goal was the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow, and he wasn't just going to be a participant. He was the chosen one. In the summer of 1980, the United States assembled a basketball squad that was terrifying. This was a team destined for gold. And who did the coaches select to lead this group of alpha males? Who was the man chosen to wear the captain's armband over future Hall of Famers like Isaiah Thomas and Rolando Blackman? It was Michael Brooks. Being named captain of the USA Olympic team is perhaps the highest honor an amateur athlete can receive. It is a stamp of approval that says, you are the best leader in the country. But then, the world outside the gymnasium crashed in. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Cold War tensions hit a boiling point, and President Jimmy Carter made a decision that would shatter the hearts of hundreds of American athletes: the boycott. The United States would not send a team to Moscow. Just like that. With the stroke of a pen in the White House, Michael Brooks' dream was flushed down the drain. There would be no gold medal. There would be no global stage to show the world that he was better than the Soviets. It is hard to overstate the psychological damage of a moment like this. This was the first major crack in the foundation. Brooks was robbed. He didn't lose. He was erased. While the politicians patted themselves on the back for taking a moral stand, Michael Brooks was left holding a uniform he would never get to wear in competition. He had the talent to be an Olympic hero, a household name before he even played an NBA minute. Instead, he became a footnote in a political dispute. And as painful as that was, it was only the beginning of a year that seemed determined to test his sanity. After the Olympic heartbreak, you would think the universe owed Michael Brooks a favor. The 1980 NBA draft was approaching, and surely the College Player of the Year would be a top 3 pick, right? He was the most dominant force in the NCAA. Logic dictates he goes first, second, or third. But the NBA draft is a strange, cruel beast, fueled by rumors and paranoia. Whispers started to circulate. Scouts began to overthink. Is he too small to play power forward? Is he too slow to play small forward? They called him a tweener, a death sentence in the rigid NBA of the 80s. They looked at his size and ignored his heart. They looked at his height and ignored his production. And so Michael Brooks began to slide. He watched as name after name was called before his. And then, at pick number 9, his name was finally called. But this wasn't a celebration. This was a funeral dirge, because the team that selected him was the San Diego Clippers. If you know anything about NBA history, you know that the Clippers franchise in the early 80s wasn't just a bad basketball team, it was a dysfunctional circus. It was a graveyard where careers went to die. Owned by the infamous Donald Sterling, the organization was a mess of penny-pinching, incompetence, and chaos. There was no culture of winning. There was only a culture of survival. Brooks was drafted into a situation that was doomed from the start. He wasn't joining a brotherhood like the Celtics or a machine like the Lakers. He was joining a sinking ship. The irony was bitter. The most disciplined, hard-working player in college basketball was thrown into the most undisciplined, chaotic locker room in the professional ranks. It felt like a cosmic joke. The Olympic captain was now a Clipper. And in 1980, that was synonymous with being cast away to an island of irrelevance. But here is the thing about Michael Brooks. He didn't know how to quit. Most players drafted into that toxic Clippers environment simply gave up. They collected their paychecks and waited to be traded. But Brooks? He was built differently. He was from Philly. He decided to fight. Despite the chaos around him, despite the terrible management and the losing culture, Brooks hit the NBA hardwood like a man possessed. He wanted to prove every single general manager who passed on him that they had made a fatal mistake. And for a while, it looked like he was going to single-handedly turn the franchise around. In his early seasons, he was a revelation. He silenced the critics who said he was a tweener. He showed that he was actually a hybrid weapon, too strong for small forwards to handle in the post, and too quick for power forwards to guard on the perimeter. He was averaging nearly 15 points and heavily rebounding against the giants of the league. He was putting up numbers that made the rest of the league take notice. There were nights when he looked like an all-star. He was aggressive, he was efficient, and he played with a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. The fans in San Diego, what few of them there were, started to fall in love with him. They saw a glint of hope in his eyes. He was the beast they had been promised. By the 1983-84 season, Brooks was entering his prime. He was physically peaking. He had figured out the NBA game. He was a starter, a key contributor, and a player who commanded respect from opponents. It seemed like he had finally outrun the bad luck. He had survived the Olympic boycott. He had survived the draft slide. He was surviving the Clippers. He was rewriting his own destiny through sheer force of will. But destiny is a cruel writer. Just as Brooks was finding his rhythm, just as he was establishing himself as a legitimate force in the league, the calendar turned to February 1984. The stage was set for a tragedy that would happen in the blink of an eye, a moment of silence that would echo for decades. The volcano he was dancing on was about to erupt. There are dates in history that are etched in stone, and there are dates that are etched in scar tissue. For Michael Brooks, and for anyone who loved the art of basketball, February 4th, 1984, is a date that should be circled in black ink. It wasn't just any game. The script writers in the sky have a twisted sense of humor, because on that night, the San Diego Clippers were hosting the Philadelphia 76ers, the defending champions, Dr. J. Moses Malone, the team from the city that raised Michael Brooks. He wasn't just playing a basketball game. He was playing against his past, against his home, trying to show the legends of Philly that the kid from West Catholic had arrived. The game was intense. Brooks was battling. He was doing the dirty work, grabbing rebounds, fighting for position against the strongest men in the world. And then, in the blink of an eye, the music stopped. It happened in the third quarter. There was no flagrant foul. There was no villain swinging an elbow. It was far more terrifying than that. Brooks went for a rebound, a motion he had repeated 10,000 times in his life. He landed, and his knee simply disintegrated. Spectators in the front row later said they heard it, a sickening pop that cut through the noise of the arena like a gunshot. Michael Brooks, the Beast, the Man of Steel, collapsed to the floor, clutching his right knee. He wasn't screaming in theatrics. This was the primal reaction of a warrior who knows, deep in his soul, that something vital has been taken from him. The arena went silent. You could hear a pin drop in the San Diego sports arena. As he was stretchered off the court, staring up at the stadium lights, the sad reality began to settle in. He didn't just twist an ankle. He didn't just strain a calf. In that split second, the explosive, high-flying Michael Brooks died. The man who was carried off the floor was someone else entirely, a man who was about to enter a dark, cold tunnel with no light at the end. To understand the horror of what happened next, you have to transport your mind back to the medical reality of 1984. Today, if an NBA player tears an ACL, it is a tragedy, sure. But we have arthroscopic surgery, stem cells, hyperbaric chambers, and rehabilitation protocols designed by NASA-level scientists. Players come back in 9 months, sometimes even stronger. But in 1984, a torn ACL compounded with other ligament damage wasn't just an injury. It was a career death sentence. It was the equivalent of a racehorse breaking its leg. The surgeons didn't make tiny incisions. They sliced the knee open. They called it the zipper, a jagged, ugly scar running down the leg that marked you as damaged goods for the rest of your life. The reconstruction techniques were primitive. They were trying to fix a Ferrari engine with a hammer and a wrench. Michael Brooks underwent major reconstructive surgery. The doctors told him the truth, cold and hard. You might walk again, but you will probably never play professional basketball again. Can you imagine the loneliness? One minute you are a rising star, the next you are in a hospital bed, your leg encased in plaster, staring at the ceiling. The phone stops ringing. The friends who wanted tickets disappear. The Clippers organization, known for being one of the cheapest and most heartless in sports history, didn't exactly roll out the red carpet of support. He was an asset that had depreciated to zero. For nearly 2.5 years, Michael Brooks vanished. He sat out the remainder of the 1984 season. He missed the entire 1985 season. He missed the entire 1986 season. 2.5 years of rehabilitation hell. 2.5 years of learning how to trust a leg that had betrayed him. Most men would have retired. Most men would have taken the insurance money and opened a car dealership. But Michael Brooks was possessed by a need to rewrite the ending of his story. He wasn't going to let a surgeon's knife be the final period in his biography. In the fall of 1986, a miracle happened. Michael Brooks returned to the NBA. But miracles in the real world are rarely like the ones in Disney movies. Yes, he was back in a uniform, signing with the Indiana Pacers and later the Denver Nuggets. But the eyes tell the truth, and the truth was heartbreaking. The beast was gone. The explosive vertical leap that allowed him to tear rims down? Gone. The lightning-quick first step that left defenders frozen? Gone. He was playing on one good leg, and one leg held together by scar tissue and willpower. Watching the game tape from 1987 is painful for anyone who knew what he used to be. He was slower. He couldn't elevate. He had to completely reinvent himself. He became a player who relied on pure intelligence, positioning, and old man strength. He set screens. He boxed out. He made the smart pass. He was still a professional, but he was a shadow. He played 33 games for the Pacers, then 42 games for the Nuggets. The stats were pedestrian, averaging 3 or 4 points a game. He was a bench warmer, a journeyman. The commentators would mention his name with a tone of pity. There's Michael Brooks. Remember how good he was at LaSalle? It was a humiliation by 1,000 cuts. He was proving the doctors wrong by simply being on the court, but he wasn't proving the scouts wrong. He couldn't dominate anymore. The NBA is a league of predators, and if you are wounded, you are food. By the end of the 1988 season, the league had chewed him up. No more contracts were coming. The phone went silent again. At 29 years old, an age when most superstars are entering their prime, Michael Brooks was washed up. The American dream was over. The NBA had closed its doors. He was facing a choice: accept that his life as a basketball player was finished, or do the unthinkable, leave the country that invented the game and go into exile. He chose exile. And little did he know, he wasn't walking away from the game, he was walking toward his kingdom. In 1988, for an American basketball player, crossing the Atlantic Ocean was not a career move, it was an admission of defeat. We need to be very clear about the context of the era. Today, the EuroLeague is respected. Today, stars like Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic bridge the gap between the continents. But in the late 80s, Europe was the basketball equivalent of Siberia. It was where you went if you were too old, too slow, or too broken to survive in the real league. When the NBA doors slammed shut in Michael Brooks's face, the whispers started again. They said he was finished. They said he should just retire and coach high school ball somewhere in Philadelphia. America had categorized him damaged goods, a former prospect who flew too close to the sun and got burned. But Michael Brooks possessed a pride that the average person cannot comprehend. He knew he could still play. Maybe he couldn't jump over a building anymore, but his hands were still golden, his mind was sharper than ever, and his heart was still beating for the game. He refused to be a museum exhibit in the United States. He refused to be the guy sitting at the end of the bar talking about what used to be. So he made a radical decision. He decided to go into exile. He packed his bags, left the familiar streets of Philly, left the bright lights of the American arenas, and boarded a plane to France. It wasn't just a flight. It was a leap of faith into the unknown. He didn't speak the language. He didn't know the culture. He was going to a place where basketball was a distant second to soccer. But he was chasing something more important than fame. He was chasing dignity. He was looking for a place where he could be Michael Brooks again, not that guy with the bad knee. He was looking for a kingdom that needed a king. And he found it in an unlikely place, a small industrial city in central France, known more for its porcelain than its pick and rolls. Welcome to Limoges. If you aren't French, you probably couldn't find it on a map. It's a working-class city, tough and proud. And in 1988, their basketball team, CSP Limoges, was looking for a savior. When Michael Brooks landed, the locals didn't know what to expect. They saw the scars on his knee. They saw a man who had been rejected by the NBA. They were skeptical. Was this just another American mercenary coming to collect a paycheck and slack off? But the moment Michael stepped onto the parquet floor of the Palais des Sports de Beaublanc, everything changed. The skeptics went silent. The murmurs turned into roars. Brooks realized quickly that he didn't need to jump 40 inches in the air to dominate Europe. He was stronger than everyone else. He was smarter than everyone else. He transformed his game completely. He became a low-post surgeon. He used his wide shoulders to create space where there was none. He developed a fadeaway jumper that was unguardable. He became the European version of Charles Barkley, an undersized power forward who bullied giants. The fans at Beaublanc are legendary. They are arguably the loudest, most passionate basketball fans in France, and they fell head over heels in love with Michael Brooks. They didn't see a broken player. They saw a warrior. They saw a man who dove for loose balls, who fought for every rebound as if his life depended on it. They gave him a status that he never received in his own country. In Philadelphia, he was a what if. In Limoges, he was a god. They chanted his name. They wore his jersey. For the first time since that terrible day in 1984, Michael Brooks wasn't playing in pain. He was playing in joy. He had found a home thousands of miles away from where he started. He was the Black King of Limoges, and his reign was just beginning. If the story ended with him just being a good player in France, it would be a nice story. But Michael Brooks was a winner, and winners need trophies. The 1989 to 1990 season stands as the magnum opus of his post-injury career. This was the year everything clicked. CSP Limoges was a powerhouse, but they needed a leader to take them over the edge. Brooks took that burden on his broad shoulders. That season, he was magnificent. He was averaging nearly 16 points and 10 rebounds a game, numbers that don't fully capture his impact. He was the emotional anchor of the team. When the game was tight, give the ball to Michael. When the crowd needed a spark, look at Michael. The climax came in the French League playoffs. The pressure was suffocating. The entire city of Limoges was holding its breath. And Brooks delivered. He dominated the paint. He bullied the opposition. He played with a ferocity that reminded everyone of the beast from LaSalle. When the final buzzer sounded and CSP Limoges were crowned champions of France, the emotions that poured out of Michael Brooks were about more than just a trophy. This was vindication. This was his answer to the critics, to the Clippers, to the doctors who told him he was done. Holding that trophy, surrounded by thousands of screaming French fans who worshipped him, Michael Brooks finally got his moment on the mountaintop. It wasn't the NBA championship. It wasn't the Olympic gold medal he was promised in 1980. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He was a champion. He had climbed out of the abyss of injury and depression and reclaimed his greatness. He proved that you can break a man's knee, but you cannot break his spirit. He was the MVP of the league. the best player in France. The ghost of 1984 had finally been exorcised, but as we know, the life of an athlete is a series of peaks and valleys, and while he basked in the glory of Limoges, the clock was still ticking. In the United States, NBA players live a very specific kind of lifestyle. It's fast cars, loud music, and flashing cameras. But in France in the early 90s, Michael Brooks found himself in a different kind of movie. He wasn't just a sports star, he was a cultural icon. He was living the life that most people only dream about. But as we peel back the layers, we have to ask, was it paradise or was it a beautiful exile? Imagine the scene. Michael Brooks, the boy from the hard streets of West Philadelphia, is now sipping fine Bordeaux in the south of France. He is dining in restaurants where the chefs know his name and prepare his favorite meals before he even sits down. He wasn't just big in Limoges, he was the biggest show in town. The French loved him not just for his basketball, but for his charisma. He had that American swagger, that cool confidence that Europeans found irresistible. He was the toast of the town. There were parties, there were galas, and yes, there was plenty of female attention. He was the Black King of the city, and the city offered him everything it had. But let's look closer at the man behind the smile. Living in a foreign country, no matter how much they love you, is isolating. You are a celebrity, yes, but you are also an outsider. While his former peers in the NBA were playing on national television in the U.S., Brooks was a king in a kingdom his family back home couldn't even find on a map. There is a bittersweet quality to this period of his life. He was adored by strangers, but he was thousands of miles away from the streets that made him. He was living in a golden cage, a very comfortable, luxurious cage, filled with applause and accolades, but a cage nonetheless. He had found success, but he had to trade his home to get it. And deep down, every American player wants to be a star in America. The applause in French sounds sweet, but it doesn't sound like home. Father Time is undefeated. It's the one opponent that no athlete, no matter how great, can beat. For Michael Brooks, the battle with time was even harder, because he was fighting with a body that had already been broken once before. After the glory years in Limoges, the reality of biology began to set in. The human knee is not designed to bear the load of a professional athlete for 2 decades, especially not a knee that had been surgically reconstructed in the 1980s. The cartilage wears down, the bones start to grind. Every jump becomes a calculation, every landing becomes a risk. Brooks moved on to other French clubs, Levallois, Strasbourg. He was still effective, still a savvy veteran who could teach the young guys a lesson or two in the post. But the beast was tired. The explosive movements were gone completely. He was playing on grit and painkillers. Watching him in these final years was like watching an old lion. He still had the roar, he still had the presence, but the hunt was becoming harder and harder. He wasn't dominating games anymore. He was managing them. He was using every trick in the book, the subtle push, the fake, the hook shot, to survive against players who were 10 years younger and 10 times faster. By 1996, the writing was on the wall. The game had squeezed every last drop of greatness out of him. He had played professionally for nearly 16 years, a miracle considering the doctors told him he was finished in 1984. But the tank was empty. He hung up his sneakers. The cheering stopped, the adrenaline faded, and for the first time in his life, Michael Brooks had to answer the most terrifying question an athlete can face. Who am I if I am not a basketball player? When the lights go out, most former stars try to cling to the spotlight. They become broadcasters, they write books, they show up at events desperate to be recognized. Michael Brooks did the opposite. He chose silence. He chose the mountains. In 2005, he made a move that surprised many. He relocated to Switzerland. Switzerland is the antithesis of the NBA. It is quiet, it is private, it is orderly. It is a place where people respect your privacy to an extreme degree. It was the perfect hiding place for a man who was tired of the noise. He became a mentor. Imagine this. You are a young Swiss kid learning how to shoot a layup, and your coach is a man who once captained the U.S. Olympic team, a man who was the best player in America. And he's there, in a cold gym in the Alps, patiently showing you footwork. It's poetic. It's humble. Brooks built a life there. He raised a family. He found a rhythm that didn't involve travel schedules and contract negotiations. He found peace. For a decade, he lived the life of a regular man. He was a father, a husband, a neighbor. The ghost of the NBA had found a resting place among the snow-capped peaks. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. While he was enjoying the clean air and the quiet life, something was going wrong inside his own body. A silent enemy was waking up, an enemy far more dangerous than any defender he had ever faced on the court. He had survived the streets of Philly, the curse of the Clippers, and the brutality of pro sports. But he was about to face a battle that he couldn't win with a basketball. You would think that after a lifetime of fighting poverty in Philly, fighting for position in the paint, fighting back from a career-ending knee injury, that the universe would let Michael Brooks enjoy his retirement in peace. But the universe is rarely that kind. In 2011, the final and most terrifying battle began, and this time, the enemy wasn't a Soviet invasion or a cheap team owner. The enemy was inside him. It started slowly, a fatigue that sleep couldn't fix. A bruise that wouldn't heal. For a man who knew his body better than anyone, Michael knew something was wrong. He was an elite athlete. He knew the difference between being tired and being broken. When he went to the doctors in Switzerland expecting perhaps a vitamin deficiency or a lingering effect of old sports injuries, he received a diagnosis that sounded like science fiction: aplastic anemia. Now that sounds medical and distant, so let me break down exactly what that means in plain English. It means your body's factory has shut down. Your bone marrow, the engine room that produces the blood cells which keep you alive, simply stops working. It stops making red blood cells to carry oxygen. It stops making white blood cells to fight infection. It stops making platelets to clot your blood. Imagine the horror. Here is a man standing 6'7", a physical specimen who once dunked on the greatest players in history. On the outside, he still looked like a mountain, but on the inside, he was hollow. He was becoming a statue. His body was defenseless. A common cold could kill him. A small cut could bleed uncontrollably. He kept this largely to himself. Michael Brooks wasn't a man who sought pity. He didn't run to the press. He didn't start a GoFundMe. He faced this silent killer with the same stoic dignity he showed when he blew out his knee in 1984. He managed the disease for years with medication and transfusions, living on borrowed time, playing a high-stakes game of poker with his own mortality. But by 2016, the house was calling in its debts. The medicine was no longer enough. By the summer of 2016, The situation had become critical. The doctors were blunt. The treatments were failing. The beast was fading. There was only one card left to play. One final desperate Hail Mary pass that could either save his life or end it. A bone marrow transplant. This is not a simple procedure like fixing a knee. This is a biological reboot. They have to wipe out your remaining immune system, essentially bringing you to the brink of death, and then introduce donor cells in the hopes that they will take and start a new factory in your bones. It is a war zone for the human body. For a man in his late 50s, the risks were astronomical. But what choice did he have? It was either take the risk or slowly fade away. And Michael Brooks was a fighter. He chose the fight. He found a match. A donor was located. Hope, that dangerous and beautiful thing, began to rise again. The plan was set. He would undergo the transplant in a specialized hospital. His family, his wife, and children gathered around him. The basketball world, largely unaware of how serious things were, went on with its business. But in a sterile room in Switzerland, the captain of the 1980 Olympic team was preparing for the biggest game of his life. The preparation was brutal. He had beaten the odds in Philly. He had beaten the odds in France. Why not one more time? The surgery took place. The donor cells were introduced. For a brief, shining moment, it looked like it might work. There is a period after a transplant called engraftment, where you wait to see if the new cells start working. It's a waiting game that can drive you insane. But then the complications started. Biology is cruel. Sometimes, no matter how hard you fight, the chemistry just doesn't work. His body, already weakened by years of the disease and the brutal conditioning for the transplant, began to struggle. The new cells were not settling in as they should. And then, the catastrophic blow. While recovering, while waiting for the miracle to take hold, Michael suffered a massive stroke. It was a complication, a side effect of the trauma his body was enduring. The stroke changed everything. It wasn't just a setback, it was the end of the road. The brain trauma, combined with his non-existent immune system, created a perfect storm of impossibility. The doctors did everything they could. The best medical minds in Switzerland were helpless against the cascading failure of his systems. It happened so fast. One moment, there was hope for a cure, a future where he could watch his children grow old. The next, he was in a coma, on life support, his powerful heart struggling to keep a rhythm. The beast who had once carried teammates on his back was now being kept alive by machines. The tragedy was absolute. He hadn't lost the battle because he was weak. He lost because the equipment, his own body, had finally irrevocably malfunctioned. The lights in the arena were dimming for the last time. The date was August 22nd, 2016. While the world was distracted by the Olympics in Rio, the very event that Michael was denied 36 years earlier, a silence fell over a hospital room in Switzerland. Michael Brooks, 58 years old, took his last breath. It wasn't a death that made breaking news on CNN. It wasn't a top story on ESPN's Sports Center. And that, in itself, is the final tragedy of this story. When a legend like Kobe Bryant passes, the world stops. But when Michael Brooks passed, the world kept spinning. Only those who knew, the die-hard fans in Philadelphia, the worshippers in Limoges, the old scouts who still kept their handwritten notes from 1980, felt the earth shift. His family was there. his wife, his children. They were the ones who saw the man, not the myth. They saw the father who cooked dinner, the husband who cracked jokes, the gentle giant who lived a quiet life in the Alps. To them, he wasn't the beast of the hardwood. He was just Dad. And he was gone too soon. 58 is nothing. It's barely the start of the golden years. But as the news slowly trickled out, a strange phenomenon occurred. In France, the reaction was immediate and emotional. The city of Limoges went into mourning. Tributes poured in. They remembered him as royalty. In Philadelphia, the old heads at the rec centers poured one out. But in the wider NBA community, it was a quiet ripple, a brief mention in an obituary column. Former Clipper Michael Brooks dies. A headline that didn't even begin to scratch the surface of who he was. So, now that the ghost has been laid to rest, we have to ask the hard question. Who was Michael Brooks? Was he a bust? Was he a tragedy? Or was he something else entirely? If you look at the raw NBA stats, 2,628 career points, a handful of seasons, you might shrug and say, just another guy. But stats without context are lies. To judge Michael Brooks by his NBA numbers is like judging a Ferrari after it's been crushed in a compactor. You aren't seeing the car, you're seeing the wreckage. We have to remember him for what he was before the world broke him. We have to remember the 1980 Player of the Year, the man who beat Magic Johnson for the top individual honor in college basketball, the man who was chosen to lead America against the Soviets. Experts who saw him play in his prime, real basketball historians, don't hesitate. They put him in the conversation with the greats. They argue that if he hadn't blown out his knee, if he hadn't been stuck on the Clippers, we would be talking about him in the same breath as Charles Barkley and Dominique Wilkins. He was a prototype for the modern forward. It's in the rafters of the arena in Limoges, where his number 32 still hangs, looking down on the court like a guardian angel. His legacy is the story of resilience. He proved that you can take everything away from a man, his knee, his Olympic dream, his home, and he can still find a way to be a king. There is a dark thread that runs through this entire story, a thread that makes you wonder if some people are just born under a bad star. Look at the timeline. 1980, the peak. Captain of the USA, Player of the Year. Then the boycott. The first strike, 1984, the year he finally breaks out in the NBA. Then the knee. The second strike, 1988, the NBA Exile. The third strike, 2016, the year of the Rio Olympics. He dies exactly as the Olympic flame is being extinguished in Brazil. Is it just random chance? Or is it the Clippers curse manifesting in its most brutal form? We talk about Bill Walton's feet, about Danny Manning's knees, about the endless string of bad luck that has plagued that franchise. But it's almost Greek in its tragedy. Achilles had his heel, Michael Brooks had his ACL. It's a reminder that the line between Hall of Fame legend and forgotten footnote is terrifyingly thin. It's a ligament. It's a political decision. It's a microscopic cell in your bone marrow. We started this journey by waking a ghost, and now, as we let him return to the shadows, what are we left with? The story of Michael Brooks isn't just a basketball story. It's a story about life. It teaches us that talent is not enough. Hard work is not enough. You can do everything right. You can be the first one in the gym. You can be the best leader. You can be a good man. and life can still sweep your legs out from under you. But it also teaches us something else. It teaches us about dignity. Michael Brooks never became the bitter old man at the bar. He didn't spend his life screaming, "It should have been me." He packed his bags. He went to France. He reinvented himself. He found love. He raised a family. He found peace in the mountains. Maybe that is the real victory. He didn't win the NBA ring. He didn't get the gold medal. But he won the game of life. He refused to let his tragedy define him. So the next time you watch a highlight reel of the 80s and you see Magic smiling or bird shooting, take a second to look at the other guys on the court. Look for the shadows. Remember the name Michael Brooks. Remember the beast. Remember the captain, because while the history books might have forgotten him, the game remembers everything. And maybe, just maybe, in some parallel universe where Carter didn't boycott and knees don't break, there is a statue of Michael Brooks outside an arena in Philadelphia, casting a long, triumphant shadow over the city that loved him first.